Is Fast X bad on purpose? Kind of. It's a little bit complicated. Over the last 10 years, every single Fast and Furious movie has been getting worse and worse. We're at a point now where the franchise doesn't take itself seriously anymore. But just because the franchise is now self-aware doesn't make it good. It's pretty fun though to go watch bad movies like this to see what they can get away with, but at what point does that fun wear off and the bad plot and bad acting and bad stunts just become annoying? Listen, how do we go from this to shooting a car into space? Look, some moments are so unbelievably unrealistic that they are now iconic. So iconic, in fact, that when you think about Fast and Furious, you think about those ridiculous stunts and moments more than you think about the cars or even the story. So instead of improving the story and making all these characters interesting, it feels like the franchise is now focused on having the biggest and most ridiculous stunts ever. Do you remember all these moments throughout the franchise, like the vault being dragged around by cars, or that time when Dom swung his car across the canyon, or even the one where he drove off a skyscraper to crash into another one? Well, Fast X is filled with these kinds of moments. The stunts are not as memorable or as big as the ones I just named, but in terms of how ridiculous they are, they 100% fit in. This movie is so bad and so unrealistic that it has to be on purpose, right? The thing is, this movie is self-aware. There's this one joke in the movie where someone mentions the fact that every time a bad guy gets invited to the cookout at the end of the movie, they become a part of the family and becomes one of the good guys the very next movie. This character then says, and I quote, "What are we all just one beer away from corruption?" And I'm not gonna lie, I laughed my ass off when I heard that line, so clearly this movie is somewhat self-aware. But is it to the point where it's now a parody of itself? Just because they are in on the joke doesn't justify how bad this movie is. The fact that they are self-aware and that they know Fast and Furious movies are bad doesn't make the movie enjoyable, at least in the long run. I don't know when's the last time I watched a movie this bad in the theaters. Every time there was some awful moment or some crazy stunt, the whole audience was laughing, but the more the movie went on, less amount of people were laughing. After an hour of an awful story and bad acting and unrealistic stunts, it's like there was this shared feeling in the room of everyone thinking, alright, we get it now. Especially since this movie is almost 2 hours and 30 minutes long. What was funny in the beginning was starting to wear off, and it was just a bad movie after the first hour. My friend even fell asleep during the second half of the movie, and I didn't even feel the need to wake him up because there wasn't anything important or interesting going on. The plot is just straight up awful. I will go more into details in the spoiler sections towards the end of the video, but damn, it was impressively bad. The villain though is at least something we haven't seen before in the franchise. Jason Momoa is kind of like a mix of the Joker from The Dark Knight and Jack Sparrow. He is always acting like a maniac and being over the top all the time, but it's pretty entertaining. John Cena is pretty much just acting like himself here. It's like he did a complete 180 in personality compared to the previous movie. He's just a cool uncle now. There's so many characters and cameos in this movie, it is so overwhelming. And it doesn't help that most of these characters don't even have their moment to shine or even a scene to develop their character arcs. It feels like everyone is just there just to be there and to watch Dom do his thing and save the day. This isn't a spoiler because it's not important to the story at all, but there is this one line that really bothered me. Ramsey, the girl that's like the hacker of the group, drops this line about knowing all the specs of this one car, and everyone looks at her and she goes, "That's right, I know stuff now." It would have been great to see that character arc on screen, but I guess we don't need to see that. Suddenly she knows everything about cars now. It kind of makes sense that she learned that much because she's been working and hanging out with the group, but then why is everyone surprised that she knows so much about cars now? And it's such a shame that they had to remove one of the only things that made her interesting. I think her being the tech genius but not knowing anything about cars was a really fun dynamic with the rest of the group. And now that she doesn't have that trait anymore, she's just a one-dimensional character running around with a laptop. She's pretty much the personification of plot convenience. Every time they will have to open a door or hack something, she just does it without an issue and then the problem is solved. Look, I might be overreacting for such a small detail, but this movie is filled with this type of writing and it just builds up over time. I lost count of how many times this kind of little thing happened and the entire story suffers from it. Not to mention, the entire conflict of the movie could have been avoided so easily easily, but I can't get into the details right now without spoiling anything, so you'll have to wait till the end. One other gripe that I have is the visuals. Fast and Furious is known for doing all their stunts practically, and that's a big reason why the franchise is as big as it is today. People go watch these movies to see what crazy stunts they can pull off, but the stunts have become so ridiculous and unrealistic that it's now impossible to make them practically, so they have to use CGI. And oh my god, the CGI is awful. At least not every stunt is CGI, but when it is, it sticks out like a sore thumb. It is terrible. Everything looks super janky and weightless. Something that should be like 1,000 pounds move as if it was made of plastic. It's to the point where it takes you completely out of the movie. I think good CGI mixed with practical effects can look amazing, but they just couldn't pull it off here. I don't have any problems with the sound design or the soundtrack. It sounds like the usual Fast and Furious movie. At the very start of the movie, Dom looks at some old pictures of the family, and there was the subtle piano of "See You Again" in the background. I'm not gonna lie, the nostalgia hit me like a truck. That was such a nice moment. But that moment lasted like a few seconds. This movie does not give you any time to process anything. The editing feels way too fast and rushed, and it's almost like it's edited like those Mr. Beast videos where there has to be a cut or something interesting every 5 seconds. For a runtime of almost 2 hours and 30 minutes, it's kind of crazy how it's like that for the entire movie. Overall, I'm going to give the movie a 4 out of 10. It's not really worth the watch. Alright, now we can get super specific with my complaints. I said earlier something about how the entire conflict of the movie could have been avoided so easily. What I meant by that is that at the start of the movie, when half of the crew goes to Rome, before they even start the heist, Dom finds out that they are going right into Dante's trap, and he says, "Shit, we're going to Rome." Why? You don't have to go anywhere. All you have to do is call them and say, "Hey, it's a setup. So the mission is off, you can come back home." And then the crew wouldn't have gotten framed for the bomb exploding, and Dom wouldn't get separated with his son, which is the entire conflict of the third act. You might be thinking, maybe they didn't have time to warn them because the scene right after he says they're going to Rome is the heist. But when Dom finds out it's a setup, he is in LA. A flight from LA to Rome is almost 12 hours. They had plenty of time before the heist even started to call the mission off, but for some reason, they don't. Another thing that bothered me was how John Cena died. It felt like the most unnecessary and anticlimactic sacrifice I've ever watched. It feels like he died for nothing. I'm sure there was some argument to be made as to why he had to stop all those cars or whatever, but that's the job of the movie, to give me a reason to care and feel sad about that death. That scene was just overall really bad. One other problem I have with the movie is the ending. Oh boy, the ending. So apparently the Fast and Furious finale is supposed to be a trilogy. The ending felt like they wrote the entire story and saw that it was too long for a feature film, so they just split the script into 3 different documents instead of writing an actual ending. Like, even if it is supposed to be part 1 of something bigger, at least end the movie properly. It just felt so cheap and lazy when I saw it in the theaters. Anyway, I'm done ranting. If you enjoyed this review or at least found it entertaining, don't forget that you can always subscribe if you want to watch more of my future reviews. And if you love watching bad movies like me and poke fun at every single aspect, you should watch my review on Apple's original movie, Ghosted. Anyway, see you.